At dawn on August 7, 1944, as mist rolled over the Norman hedgerows, General Hans Eberbach prepared to launch Germany's most desperate armored gamble since the fall of France. In Berlin, maps still showed bold arrows pointing west, but on the ground, Germany's once invincible panzer force was already bleeding to death. Operation La 1/4 Ditch was not designed to win the war, but to stop defeat from becoming inevitable. The objective was simple, brutal, and ambitious: drive 40 kilometers west, seize Avranches, and cut General Patton's Third Army in half. If the attack succeeded, the Allied breakout from Normandy would collapse like a snapped bridge. Eberbach commanded 185 tanks, including Panthers and Panzer IIs, machines once feared across Europe. To German planners, armor was still the king of the battlefield. What they failed to understand was that the battlefield itself had changed. Normandy was no longer a contest between tanks and infantry, but between factories and fuel depots, airfields and assembly lines. The German columns began moving before sunrise, engines growling softly to avoid Allied detection. Steel tracks crushed to covered grass as tank crews whispered prayers into the darkness. Every kilometer forward was a race against time, because daylight meant death. German intelligence believed Allied aircraft would be limited by weather and surprise. That belief was already outdated by years. Unseen above the clouds, Allied radar stations detected movement almost immediately. By mid-morning, reports reached RAF airfields across southern England and Normandy. Pilots were briefed with brutal clarity: German armor was moving in force. There would be no dogfights, no heroic duels in the sky. This mission was extermination. At forward airbases, Hawker Typhoons were armed with rockets designed for one purpose only: killing tanks. Each aircraft carried 8 rockets, crude, inaccurate, and devastating. The Typhoon was not elegant, but it was ruthless. Pilots called it the Panzer Killer. As German tanks advanced through narrow roads and open fields, the sky began to betray them. The first Typhoons appeared as distant dots, then as screaming shapes diving from the sun. Rockets slammed into columns of armor, tearing turrets from hulls and flipping tanks like toys. Explosions echoed across the countryside, followed by pillars of black smoke. German crews bailed out into fields already burning. Radio communication collapsed almost instantly. Orders could not outrun aircraft moving at hundreds of kilometers per hour. Every attempt to regroup became a fresh target. Columns stopped moving, then began dying in place. By noon, the attack had lost momentum. German officers realized with horror that their tanks were not fighting soldiers, but production numbers. For every destroyed Typhoon, another took its place within hours. For every lost German tank, there would be no replacement. Factories in Britain and America worked day and night, while German industry starved under bombing and shortages. This was not a failure of courage. Panzer crews fought with discipline and determination. But courage cannot shoot down rockets falling from the sky. By early afternoon, the Norman fields had become graveyards of twisted steel. Tank hulls burned like furnaces, ammunition cooking off in violent bursts. Eberbach watched reports arrive faster than he could process them. Entire units ceased to exist between radio calls. The battlefield no longer belonged to generals. It belonged to logistics. The sun climbed higher, and with it, the Typhoons returned again and again. Each sortie erased weeks of German production in seconds. Each rocket was an argument Germany could no longer answer. Operation La 1/4 Ditch was supposed to change the course of the war. Instead, it revealed the truth of modern warfare. Wars were no longer decided by maneuvers on maps, but by output charts in factories. By sunset, the German advance had not reached Avranches. It had barely survived itself, and the day was far from over. By early afternoon on August 7, 1944, Operation La 1/4 Ditch was no longer an attack but a slow-motion execution. German tank columns that were supposed to be racing west now stood frozen, trapped between hedgerows, smoke, and fear. The battlefield stretched across Normandy like an open ledger of losses waiting to be written. Above it, the RAF Typhoons returned in relentless waves. There was no single decisive strike, only repetition. Again and again, aircraft dove low, fired rockets, and vanished before German gunners could react. This was not air combat, it was industrialized killing. In just 7 hours, the RAF flew 294 Typhoon sorties. Each sortie represented fuel refined, metal-shaped, pilots trained, and logistics perfected. Each sortie was proof that the Allies could afford to keep coming. The German army could not. A total of 2,088 rockets were fired into armored columns, crossroads, and supply vehicles. The rockets were inaccurate by modern standards, but accuracy no longer mattered. German armor was concentrated, exposed, and predictable. Every road became a firing lane. Every pause became a death sentence. Tanks attempted to scatter, but dispersion only made them easier to hunt. Crews abandoned vehicles and ran for tree lines that no longer offered safety. The sound of Typhoon engines became a weapon itself. German soldiers learned to fear the whistle before the explosion. Reports from the front turned desperate. Units that had reported full strength in the morning were gone by mid-afternoon. Commanders asked for air cover that did not exist. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, was absent. Germany had lost the sky long before it lost Normandy. Without air superiority, armor became scrap metal waiting for delivery. Eberbach's headquarters drowned in conflicting messages. Some officers claimed breakthroughs that no longer existed. Others reported entire battalions erased in minutes. Maps became lies. Reality was written in smoke columns visible for kilometers. German logistics collapsed next. Fuel trucks burned. Ammunition carriers detonated, repair crews vanished. A tank without fuel is not a weapon. It is a coffin. Even undamaged vehicles were abandoned as crews fled on foot. Every abandoned tank was a silent confession of defeat. This was not a battlefield defeat caused by poor tactics. German tank crews did everything doctrine demanded. They advanced, maneuvered, and fought. But doctrine had no answer to unlimited air power. The Allies did not need perfect strategy. They needed production. Factories in Britain replaced lost aircraft faster than Germany could even count its losses. Pilots flew multiple missions per day, knowing reinforcements were guaranteed. German crews knew the opposite. Every loss was permanent. Every explosion was irreplaceable. As the afternoon wore on, the German counterattack disintegrated into isolated pockets of resistance. There was no longer a front line, only wreckage. The hedgerows of Normandy became museums of failure. Panthers burned beside Panzer IVs, symbols of engineering brilliance undone by numbers. By late afternoon, General Eberbach understood the truth. Operation Lüttich was finished. Not because German soldiers lacked courage, not because commanders lacked skill, but because Germany lacked time, fuel, factories, and skies. The war had outgrown generals. It now belonged to supply chains. By sunset, 123 German tanks were destroyed or disabled. Nearly two-thirds of the attacking force had ceased to exist. The largest armored counterattack since D-Day had ended in a single day. Patton's Third Army remained untouched. The Allied breakout continued unchecked. And somewhere above the smoking battlefield, Typhoons were already turning back to Bazi to refuel, rearm, and return. Because they could. When the sun set over Normandy on August 7, 1944, the battlefield fell silent, but the verdict of the war had already been delivered. Operation Lüttich did not fail gradually. It collapsed instantly, crushed beneath a force Germany could no longer challenge. The Panzer army that had once conquered Europe now lay scattered and smoking fragments across French fields. General Hans Eberbach had followed orders, deployed experienced crews, and committed some of Germany's finest armor. None of it mattered. World War II was no longer a contest of brilliance at the front. It was a competition of endurance behind it. While German factories struggled under bombing, shortages, and forced labor, Allied assembly lines never slept. In Britain and America, aircraft rolled off production lines faster than pilots could be trained. Losses were calculated, expected, and replaced. This was the new reality of war. The RAF Typhoon was not feared because it was perfect. It was feared because it was endless. Every destroyed aircraft was replaced. Every exhausted pilot rested, rearmed, and returned. German commanders faced the opposite equation. Every tank destroyed represented months of lost production. Every experienced crew was irreplaceable. The battlefield became a balance sheet Germany could not afford. Patton's Third Army continued its advance, uncut, unbroken, unstoppable. The German High Command spoke of counterattacks, but the language of opportunity was already obsolete. Air power had rewritten the rules. Armor without air cover was no longer a spearhead, it was a liability. The hedgerows of Normandy proved that courage could not defeat capacity. Discipline could not defeat supply chains. Bravery could not defeat factories. The lessons of August 7 echoed far beyond France. Future wars would not be decided by who had the best generals. They would be decided by who could produce more, faster, and longer. Germany had lost that war long before the first Typhoon fired its rockets. It had lost it in steel shortages, fuel rationing, and bombed out factories. Operation La 1/4 Ditch merely made the truth visible. 7 hours of air attacks erased years of armored doctrine. 7 hours proved that industrial power had replaced tactical genius. 7 hours ended the age of the tank as the supreme battlefield weapon. From that day forward, air superiority became non-negotiable. The battlefield belonged to those who owned the sky. Generals could still plan, soldiers could still fight, but victory belonged to the nations that could keep replacing what was lost. As darkness covered Normandy, repair crews counted wrecks while Allied aircraft prepared for the next mission. The war moved on, indifferent to heroism, because machines, not men, now set the pace. And in World War II, the side with the larger factories did not just win battles, it won history.